Hi, welcome to Quiet Before. I'm Swati Khurana, and I'm here with a dear, dear friend, DJ Rekha.
Hello, Swati. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Exciting to be here. I want to thank Nancy and everyone who made this conversation possible. I have no sense of time because I've known DJ Rekha for so long, and we've been in community together for so long. So I just wanted to maybe say I met DJ Rekha actually at a party. You were DJing a salsa party.
Is that
And
the first time we met? I thought
yes,
I thought we had, yeah, but we had talked on the phone before, I
maybe,
think.
or I thought we had talked after, but when Rekha's working, they're very busy, and you don't really, bother a DJ when they're working. That's not polite. But so that was, I think, 1994. And I just wanted to kind of go back to those moments. And
Mhm.
when did you name yourself as DJ Rekha?
I started, I would say loosely, whatever that means, DJing in 92 with my two cousins, Deepak and Nitin. But of our group, Nitin was the DJ, really. So they left, they ended up moving back to India and eventually to Australia. Somewhere in when the first cousin left, Nitin, I think then I kind of adopted the name. Not really confident or secure in knowing how to DJ much. Probably around 94, 93, 94.
What was your relationship to just music like as a kid?
Pretty obsessive. I moved from Queens to Long Island right before 11. And I think from then on, I went really deep. I first got into the Beatles. I didn't have a lot of friends, and just the transition from urban living to suburban living. Shortly before that, John Lennon had died. There was a lot of Beatles and John Lennon stuff everywhere. And I think I was drawn to him because of his activism. The library where I lived had so much music we could just take out, and they had all these albums, so I'd borrow them. My sister was actually more obsessed with music. She bought the first records. We listened to the radio. We made 8-track mixtapes. But she was older, and so she took the lead. Things really changed when I got my first Walkman. It was like amazing. I remember the first time putting on headphones and listening to music in a Walkman. It was a Michael Jackson. It was at someone's house, some snotty kid from the community. It was a new toy, and not a lot of people had them, and I put it in my ears and I was like, wow, I felt like I could hear the music on one side and Michael on another. And of course, that's all due to Quincy Jones' production. But then I was the kid that always had the Walkman on. Everywhere I went, I had the Walkman on with my mom. I was always her like helper with shopping and whatnot. Just got, kind of obsessed with music in different phases, different artists. At some point in my teenage years, wanted to learn Hindi better, so I got really into Bollywood and older Bollywood. The other connection in music was through my parents, in that around the late 80s, no, not the late 80s, the 80s, there started to be a proliferation of VHS cassettes, of Bollywood cassettes, and sometimes they would be compiled as songs. And so when we hung out with other families, music was a real strong part of the socializing, and they would have house parties and they would play music, all the like Bollywood music, or they would make their own bootleg like videos with just songs in them. Growing up, we had Kiss FM, which was basically a black music station, and all the kids in school listened to it. Even our school played a basketball game with the people from Kiss FM. I had a Kiss card. I don't know what it got me, but so there were a lot of different like genres of music I was engaging with for different reasons. But I think 11 on is what I would say is like pretty obsessed. Like it was a very fundamental part of my daily life.
You mentioned some Bollywood film tapes. Were there any films or songs in particular that just imprinted on you?
Yeah, Hum Kisi Se Kam Nahi was a big one. My mama G, my mom's brother, would send us, it's funny, he would send us albums from India and then he would sign them. I'm like, I don't know what that's about, as a gift, maybe. So that one, that was a big one. There's a lot of dance scenes in it. All the Amitabh movies. I loved Namakalal, Dawn. They had these sort of classic tunes. I also really liked Mohammed Rafi. I listened to him out of context from the movies, just songs. And our family friend, my uncle, Bhushan uncle, I don't know why. I was always in the car with him. I was like the live GPS. He'd always take me along because I knew how to get everywhere. And he had endless like Muhammad Rafi cassettes. So there's some movies that we watched over and over again. Frame Rogue was one of them. We watched that movie a lot for some reason. There were a handful of videotapes that we owned. A lot of them were rented. I like the movie Kranti a lot, which was sort of like a revolutionary movie. The songs are okay.
We were talking about Bollywood and you are, really the expert to me in this and just for so many of us. When did you start having access to recorded, more contemporary Bhangra?
Bhangra, Bollywood being the music from Hindi film soundtracks. Bhangra kind of a misnomer technically, but coming to represent a swath of Punjabi music. We had one Punjabi folk record, and so this is interesting because my parents grew up in Delhi, so ethnically they're Punjabi, so they speak Punjabi at home, but they also speak Hindi, and that's sort of there's a sense of that's a more formal way to communicate. And their Punjabi is very different from Punjabi that's spoken in Punjab. It's closer to Hindi. I remember that one folk record. It's sung in Punjabi, not Hindi, which is what we were mostly acquainted with. And then literally, not literally, but my first encounter with more contemporary Punjabi, I mean, contemporary, we're talking about 30 years ago, was that, and I've said this many times in many places, my mom went to England and brought back a cassette of Malkit Singh. And at that time, and even in the diaspora, he was really blowing up, and he had this one song, Tutak Tutak Tutiya, and his band, it was Malkit Singh and Golden Star. She brought me back the album. She thought I would like it. And I did. It was great. And then a few years later, my cousins, the ones who I started DJing with, so I was like 15 then, 15, 16. No, I was 15 because that was the engagement party of the cousin. And then the wedding of the cousin was 16. When I was 16 on the way back from India, and I actually saw a live Bhangra band, Sean, that was actually on Bali Segu's album. Then I heard through my cousins who would get stuff from school, from their friends, Malkit Singh's voice, like sort of like in a mashup or a remix or whatever you want to call it, put out by Bali Segu. And that's what really did it for me. I was like, what the hell?
Was that Star Crazy?
Star Crazy, yeah, Star Crazy.
How would we describe what Star Crazy is to folks who may
Star Crazy was an album put out by Oriental Star Agencies, which was a label by Pakistani immigrant from Birmingham. And he, I think he ran a grocery store and also a label. And he had recorded Malkit Singh, Golden Star, and Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. And Bali Segu had done, at that point, one version of a Malkit song. It was called Tutak, that song that got so popular, like a deaf mix. Then they asked him to like take more music and make a fuller album. So he was a young kid at that time, and he made this album called Star Crazy, which had Malkit Singh on it, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan on it, and some of the local Bhangra bands. Those were the two like main artists that were big. I'm wrong. The album I'm talking about is Wham Bam, not Star Crazy. Star Crazy came later. Wham Bam. And on that, he basically used not just Malkit, but Malkit was the first track, mostly Malkit songs on Star Megamix. And that was a really long track. He used a couple other bands, local bands. And he eventually did a volume 2, Wham Bam volume 2, which sounds very different. And then Bali Segu went on to make a few more albums with Oriental Star, one called Essential Raga, which was dancehall and Punjabi music, and then Star Crazy. And then he did one with just Nusrat called Magic Touch. Then I think he progressed to he's been on several labels.
So these albums that Bali Segu is involved with producing, they were around the time that you were getting into DJing.
I mean, they were the reason I was getting into DJing, to be honest. I always liked music. I was into hip hop. And when I heard these things combined, my mind was blown. And then after that, Apache Indian came along. The impetus to DJ was not just the music. It was being in a moment where we started seeing other kids DJ. And part of it was like using some of this music. I think it was a combination of those things. I don't think the music alone made me like think about DJing, because I think I heard it first and then got interested or acquainted with DJing later. I didn't actually start DJing till much later than when I first heard the music. So I think that it took a while for the connection to be made.
I'm wondering, Rekha, if you could share the story you had shared with me many years ago about the sign that you and your cousin
Yeah.
start DJing.
I'll share that. So basically, my cousins actually and I bonded over like discovering this music, sharing this music, any way we could get our hands on it. We decided that, they had done a Bhangra performance at their school in Flushing, Queens, and then they were asked to do it again at a community event. And the DJs there at this time, there was only like one or two crews. We felt like the guy was being a jerk. And, it's actually ironic. The Walkman that I listened to,
Mhm.
the Walkman of Gagan Gyani, who was the son of a family friend who at one point I was very close to. His parents owned a sari shop in Flushing, and we used to use the empty spools as played Star Wars with them. And then he joined Magic Mike's crew, and they were doing the sound or whatever for this Bhangra performance, and we felt that they were sabotaging the sound. I don't know if it's true because they were like, well, the tape was low. I'm like, they just seemed like hot shit, cocky ass, whatever. I was like, fuck you, I can do this, or we
Right.
can do this. And then we were thinking about it. We were incubating it. We were incubating a name. We were, mulling it around, and we're driving, and then all of a sudden we see like these speakers on the road, like just like flat out on the road. They were just there. And we're like, yo, this is a sign. This is a sign. Stopped the car, went over them, picked them up. They were cardboard boxes. We still took it as a sign.
Do you remember around what year that was?
That would have been 92.
So, Rekha, by the time I met you in 94, you were fully on flyers for events in the community. What kind of got you between the speakers on the street to the parties you were doing in 94 and then eventually Basement Bhangra?
June 26, 1992 was the first gig that I ever did in any capacity. I was not the DJ, but the crew. It was my cousins, me, one CD player that we bought, one CD player we took from my parents' rack, amplifier taken from my parents' stereo rack, speakers bought from a family friend of horrible quality. It was a very, I'm going to use a Hindi word, jugaad system, or very like scotch tape and chewing gum put together, and the amp kept overheating because it wasn't meant to be used that way. That was our first gig. Famously got $51, and then it just kept going from there. We just kept getting more money, got a little more money, bought more gear. First cousin ended up going back to India. So cousin number two, it's you and me. It's funny because I just saw him recently after 11 years or something. No, even longer. And we reminisced a lot about those days. And we realized that we were both the creative kind. And Nitin, his younger brother, was the more like diligent one who actually learned technically how to do things. So when it was just me and him, I would make him actually physically manipulate the equipment, but I was telling him what to play. And throughout the whole history of the crew, like I had a deep sense of music and knowledge. In fact, we combined our knowledge in that they had a particular upbringing in India. They were only here for a short time, and they were exposed to certain sets of music and more Indian. And I kind of knew the canon of American music. And so as we were physically building our collection, I always kind of knew what to play. And even as a kid, when I was like listening and going to the supermarket with my mom, picking up the Rolling Stone at the beginning of the shop, putting it back down, not buying it at the end. Or I don't know why, but at 11 years old, I was buying Billboard magazine, and I could always feel like I could predict what song was going to be number one or not, or how good it was. We watched a lot of Casey Kasem,
Yeah.
American Top 40. American Top 40 was the radio show. American Top 10 was the TV version. And, MTV came along. Monu started DJing, Monu Deepak, the house name Monu. And then I kind of did it too with him, maybe a little bit. And then he left too. So then I was stuck with it. And then a lot of the gigs I did in 94 were community gigs like Salga or other CAV or things like that. After Deepak left, it was kind of at a crossroads of, can I manage and handle this? But we already had gigs on the table. We had a gig where it was a family. Now it's kind of funny because it was auntie's 40th birthday. I'm like, shit, that auntie, we're both way past the 40 mark. I'm like, that's so nuts to me. When Deepak left, I gave him all the music.
Oh.
I said, you just take these CDs or whatever. Or I gave him a lot of stuff as a parting gift. Some of it I kept, some of it, I think I gave him all the cassettes. I can't remember. I was introduced to a friend's family friend, this guy, Joy Bhattacharya, who we both know. He did college radio. He was kind of a New York City kid, hip hop head. He was very musical and he knew how to mix cut and scratch more than any of us ever did. He didn't really know Hindi music. He grew up in a Bengali household, but as much as any South Asian is exposed to general Bollywood. But, we really connected over hip hop, Biggie, all that stuff. Biggie for sure. And I, said, do you want to do this gig? And got paid $400. I gave him a crisp 100 note, I think, at that time. He was enthralled and started working together. And I think it was just like a time and place thing. He happened to live about, 10 minutes from my parents' house. I think at that point I was like either just moving out or in and out, but stayed at my parents' house a lot. He was in between schools. He'd started upstate and then transferred, but he had a semester off in between. So we just kind of had a lot of time. He really taught me, actually. I would go with him and then he would do a lot of the work. And then at some point he pulled me aside. He goes, look, your name is on everything. And I know you let me do it because I'm more comfortable, but you got to learn how to do this too. You can't just whatever. Then he found me a 0-pitch mix. It was Romantic Call and Akhiyan Mila or something. It's like basically 2 songs. At this time also, we're seeing a lot of Hindi remix cassettes. So sort of DJs taking sections of songs that are like in time and adding beats to them and reassembling them so they're more danceable. This was a 0-pitch mix, which meant that basically it's in the same key and same tempo. So if you just started them both at the same time, it felt like it was a different version. I was pretty good at segueing and going from one to the other, and programming was very strong. It was more the technical stuff of like getting the mix on and that. But by then I did have a lot of like innate sense of when to start and stop and all that. He pushed me a lot and we spent a lot of time trying to work on things. By the time Basement started in 97, I was pretty like comfortable DJing and felt good about it more. And as the technology made things easier, I think I got better.
I wanted to go back to Basement Bhangra and the early parties you were talking about. Let's talk about the name and what's your connection between basements and music?
Well, we had a basement in my house, and that's where the DJ setup was. Basement meant a lot of different things to me. I mean, I think ultimately it was just alliteration, and it was a suggestion. There were a couple of names flying around, and this was sort of like there was a person that worked at SOBs and said, you got to do a monthly. This is really cool. Come up with something, this, that, and threw a bunch of names around. And this one kind of like somehow this felt good. The funny thing is SOBs is street level.
Right.
There is no basement. I mean, there is a basement, but the party is street level. But basement is, underground, not known, down low. It has a sense of unmainstream. I mean, it could mean all these things to me. And then, the time I started, there was also like I was getting into jungle and drum and bass at the same time. In fact, the first time my name was on a flyer, it was a jungle flyer, like a proper, like professionally printed. Words like basement, bashment were used interchangeably, Yeah, it just sounded cool. I think the party grew into its name.
Definitely. So who are some other key people who really helped that party? You mentioned Joy. You obviously mentioned your cousins who had left before that started.
You were very important. I felt like you were at all the meetings in the beginning, and I think there was a time when we just hung out a lot too much. I told somebody the other day, if you're a friend of mine and you haven't been on an errand waiting in the car, do I really love you? Swati, unfortunately, has been subjected to a lot of that.
In more than one country.
So, hangers in zone 6. I was just telling somebody about that. Yeah, I'm trying to cut down on that. It's my personality. What did I do all morning? Move a dresser, move a bed, move a this, dropping off dry cleaning in a different neighborhood because I like the way the dry cleaner better. The early people were I think a lot of the people that were part of the community, or the folks that came, were sort of part of this activist community I was a part of, and a queer community, and a community of scholars in training is the best way to put it. And some of those worlds overlapped. So when we first started the party, it was our friends, some extension of our circle. But what was happening at the same time, in addition to these artists and queers and academics and training, were also this other scene that we became a part of, which was a very straight, heteronormative Desi party scene. So these two worlds were sort of both happening at the same time. That other scene was different promoters fighting for different venues, a lot of physical. You got a venue, you made a flyer, you went to somebody else's party, you stood outside, you flyered them. There wasn't really internet. This is before internet. Sometimes you phoned people. We had voicemail. I remember the first time we sent a HTML email. It was such a big deal. Emails used to just be text. Yeah, so there was a lot of, like, on that front, competition. And the cool thing about Basement is doing it on a Thursday. We started it on first Thursday. I don't know where that part came up, but it was like a monthly and first Thursday. So the idea of the monthly party was actually kind of new in New York in general, because most parties, if they were regular, they were every week. And we just did it every month. And the fact that it was Thursday, nobody wanted to do parties on Thursday. It was too risky. It was too much bridge and tunnel coming in. And I was like, let's filter people out. And we ended up getting a lot of students, undergrad, graduate, Columbia, NYU, especially proximity to NYU. The first year and a half, it was very much people physically living nearby. And then as the party grew, people just started coming from all over. And it was doable because it was once a month. So you'd make the effort, or you'd route your business trips for it, or the stories I've heard. And I think this is true of a lot of parties that have consistency, staying power, following, that build community. People gravitate and plan around it.
So there's a kind of symbiotic relationship between creating Basement Bhangra and also building the community that goes to Basement Bhangra, and also your own involvement in activist communities. I was wondering, since we talked a little bit about you and your cousins and figuring out that, you were into music and amassing the gear that you first kind of patched together and eventually got money for, what was your impetus to get involved in different community-based organizations, or were there certain events that inspired you to act and you found like-minded people?
I was involved in community activism before I was involved in DJing. So those things naturally flowed together. My suggestion was always, let's throw a party. There was one particular meeting that was like supposed to be a meeting of different orgs, and it was so tense. And so, like, you were at that meeting, right, Swati? The bathroom meeting?
Bathroom meeting, yes. And that's at
It was this infamous bathroom meeting that was at the Gay and Lesbian Community Center, in a room that was a former bathroom. It was organized by Saki for South Asian Women, who at that point had been the more senior community org, and they dealt with DV issues. And I was part of an org called YAR, which meant friend, but it was kind of Youth Against Racism. And all the people in that group were about 5 years older than me, including Preet Bharara, funnily enough. A lot of those people were Columbia people who went to Columbia Law School, or undergrads who then became lawyers or whatever. And I met those people from going to the civil trial of Kulshul Sharan, who was a doctor beaten, left for dead in front of a fire station in Jersey City, the second most violent crime against South Asians in the late 80s, with an intense rise of racism. First one being Nafroz Modi, who was beaten to death while his white colleague was left untouched in Jersey City. And there was a letter called Dot Busters that was sent to the press saying that we hate Indians, paraphrasing, you can look it up. Go in the phone book, we look up Patel, this, that, they have dots, this, that, we don't like them, get out of here. Signed the Dot Busters. I was a student at Queens College, heard about this trial, and immediately, I was like, yeah, the idea around All Deaf that was trying to support, or I think it was representing Dr. Sharan, wanted to pack the court. I drove to Camden with Tito Sinha, funnily enough, who eventually went to work at All Deaf at some point. Tito Sinha, my friend Anu Sachdeva, and Madhulika Khandelwal, who was a former director of Asian American Center and professor at Queens College, who told us about this. And that was when I met Rita Sethi and this other woman, Ritu Sinha, who unfortunately passed a few years later. And these were women that looked different to me. They didn't look like good Indian girls, whatever. They were sort of like, they had kinky hair. They just seemed different. They didn't seem like coiffed in a certain way that I was probably sheltered and didn't know. And I was young and I was very enthusiastic. And I was like, yeah, let's fight the power. I'd already been like radicalized by growing up in Westbury, Long Island, where there was like, everyone had an anti-apartheid pin for Divest Now. A lot of our teachers grew up during the civil rights movement. It was mostly African American. There's a strong sense of African American history. Every assembly, we played Lift Every Voice. So I was very much politicized at school. And then I also started listening to WBAI radio, which was sort of this lefty free speech radio station. So I already had those connections in my head and wanted to be part of fighting the power and making change. So that happened first. And so in terms of the activist spaces, and those people became part of my social circle. I felt like I found like-minded people who cared about the same things I did, even though I was out of school. Queens College had a large South Asian population. And in high school too, I was involved in Amnesty International, and all these threads were happening. All these layers were happening at the same time.
I started going to many of your parties, and the first basement, before there was a Basement Bhangra, when you had played music for a different band, and then I think the
right, yeah, Punjabi by Nature, what a name.
Right. And so I just remember that, and it really did feel that every month you would just see your friends. It was a really easy way to just be like, I'll see you next month. Are you going that month? And it was kind of a shorthand in a lot of ways. And I also just wanted to kind of ask, because I think that inclusive spaces, gender expansive places, non-patriarchal spaces are so important to you and the communities you're a part of. It's got to be hard, to cultivate that in New York nightlife, especially in the 90s. What were some of the things that you and folks at Basement Bhangra like tried to do intentionally to kind of create a party vibe that was different than, the other kind of course, the activist fundraisers are always a certain vibe, but like the other club nights, like what was different about Basement Bhangra? What did you do, or what did you ask for that maybe, people became aware when they were working with you, but this is the kind of stuff you needed to do?
We didn't always succeed in making the space safe. We followed our activist instincts, where a lot of us were queer. Some of us, including me, didn't know it at the time. I think things you can do to create a certain kind of safety is like, or the certain kind of audience. One was, don't charge a lot of money. Make it accessible. Dress codes, make it, those two things, or like drink minimums or whatever, make it inviting. I think the physical setup of SOBs at that time had this sort of vibe. It had a tropical like vibe. It was like a ground floor space that you entered pretty directly, whereas in clubs, a lot of times you got to go through a bunch of shit and it's very dark. And SOBs wasn't necessarily bright, but the ceilings were super high.
Right.
There were these columns. And I think that's what I did. And where I could, I tried to be mindful of people that were, crossing boundaries of safety. But, today the notion of consent in spaces is very strong. Every club has a policy and it says it, consent, all those things. We didn't have it then. We had it on a personal level. And I also think that ultimately the space became about the music. To me, I mean, maybe others would see it otherwise, or they went there for different reasons, but the music was the glue. It was the foundation of the space. It was not what you heard in other places.
You had, our friends and community members come and drag at different times, like as guests, not necessarily.
Yeah, they did. And unfortunately, sometimes those weren't safe spaces for them. I took a lot of responsibility. I felt really bad about it. I hid that it happened. I think now that I have distance, I can acknowledge it. It was upsetting and it bothered me a lot, but I didn't know what to do about it. And then at some point I realized like this was greater than me. I'm trying to fight. I didn't even have the language then, male toxicity, heteronorm, cis man toxicity, because that was some of the stuff, that shit that happens in clubs, shit that happens when people are drinking, You know, people get sloppy and loose, people get excited. The minute we saw anything, we like nipped it in the bud or whatever and tried to whatever I could do to make it safe. It was clear to me that I wanted to create a certain kind of vibe and a certain kind of openness. And I think a lot of it was around like just the music, hearing things you don't hear, being excited about it, sharing it with people that were also excited.
Wonder if you could talk a little about Your Attention, Please. How that started, how it was connected to Basement Bhangra, when it kind of stopped and ended. Because I do think that that created a different vibe for the early part of every party. Was the
Uh,
party that followed right
It
after
was
that.
a great, unfortunately, not short-lived effort that I never revisited. Once Basement got going and, you know, eventually Joy departed because he just couldn't give to the party the way, you know, was required. And from then on, I felt pretty alone. I had other supports and hired people, but it was hard. The Your Attention Please idea was, and I still use that model in different ways. That was just a more direct effort. I just really didn't have enough resource to keep it going. Basically, the idea was, you know, our doors opened pretty early at 7, kind of like more of a happy hour vibe. From 7 to 9, we would program something musical different from the main event to give a platform for artists who, for them, maybe this was the first time to play at a stage like this or whatever. And then 70% of proceeds would go to partnering organization. So I burned through all the orgs I knew and through all the live acts that were easy to come by. And then it just got harder. And sometimes the orgs wouldn't really pull people. It was a way for them to raise money for themselves. And then my career started to pick up. You know, it wasn't just Basement wasn't the only thing. There was a lot going on, so I couldn't manage it. Though I never revisited it directly, the concept of subverting the night with something different, that stuck. Eventually we did Third Thursdays, and that was also a platform for different kind of music. That was the same thing. Early, put on something South Asian related, not genre wise the same, to give people a platform and have something happening programmatically early. A lot of different people played. I mean, through that series, the Red Barat played there for the first time. And I said, you got 30 minutes. It's the attention span of this crowd. And that was the thing. It was sometimes pretty scary for the artists because they're like, oh my God, I'm going into the Bhangra den. What the fuck is going to happen? I'm like, it's fine. It's early enough. The people who come early are different. Just hit it and split it, record it, do what you got with it. You know, you're going to be on a proper stage. You know, it's going to be good. Let's invoke something musically different in this space. During the summer of the Republican National Convention, all summer we raised money for Not in Our Name. Various points more informally raised money for different orgs. Katrina, Malcolm X grassroots movement, as it arose, not as organized as Your Attention Please, but always trying to combine those two worlds in some way.
I think one of the things that's really interesting about you, Rekha, is, and forgive me, was your major urban studies?
Yes, it was.
That's what I thought. Maybe you can just talk a little bit about, you know, the different cities you were born and lived in. And also in terms of, I'm thinking a lot about what you brought to this kind of music scene for us in New York and how that might have been in conversation with some of these other diasporic, you know, cities and you know, thinking of Toronto and London and just the kind of flow that we had amongst ourselves.
I was born in England, but at 10 months old, I was sent to India. Something my parents say that was one of their biggest regrets or mistakes or whatever. But that meant I grew up with my extended family. My first language was Punjabi and Hindi, first languages, which I don't remember that time in India, but I think it definitely had an impact. Went back to England, where we still have connections, then moved to the States. And then this is how you and I bonded, Swati. In those days in the 90s, we would go to Desh Pradesh every year in Toronto. So every time I went to Toronto, definitely went record shopping. And I physically had to get the media. This is no streaming, downloading. So because we had the connections in London, when I started, even when my cousins were here, my dad was there starting up one of his wackamania businesses. And I sent my cousin's wife. This is the same cousin that has the engagement party that then, and you stayed at their house, that has the engagement party that then I go to the wedding to see my first Bhangra band, that whose wife takes my list, which at that time I would type everything. I typed my dad a letter And I gave him a list. And she went to Southall Broadway and basically brought my first Creative Bhangra records, which I still have, all of them. And then them being there as an anchor for me, I would then eventually start traveling to England to buy records. And part of that was knowing I had a place to stay. And flights were hella cheap then. The pound was terrible, so I was basically living on bounty bars. Very filling if you need a quick fix. That and egg salad sandwiches that were everywhere.
Because England does have sandwiches that are not.
Their sandwiches are like, you never want to eat a sandwich that's been sitting around in New York anywhere, but in England, for some reason, it's fine. I also went to India a bit. And, I guess got a little bit more older records. Musically, India wasn't as fertile for me at that time, but it was more about familial connection. And then visiting the cousins that left me. I mean, a friend of mine said it once, is like, I literally brought the music to the people. I mean, that sounds really egotistical. I don't mean.
It's accurate. I'm going to co-sign that friend.
And part of that was like starting to slowly build relationships with some producers and musicians where, you get advanced copies or different copies, or some of these stores had bootlegs. I mean, things that you could never get without going. I mean, that's what record digging is about. That's what finding stuff that's different is about. And that's what makes it the DJing different versus, what you can get easily. Sometimes it's not easy, what you're trying to get.
Thinking a lot about the cultural impact of Basement Bhangra and just, it just from my because I loved going out. So I would, occasionally go to the mainstream party, sometimes with you, because we were checking other things out. And I don't know, I may have handed out a flyer here and there as well.
Yeah, you handed out a lot of flyers.
That's part of the game. But I think there was something that I think, because Rekha, you're an artist and you're around artists, that there was something that I think Basement was doing in terms of even if it's graphics from early on.
Oh, yeah.
The visuals are having a kind of aesthetic sensibility in any space, from the logo, the typeface, because there was like this kind of chaotic way that some other flyers looked, and there was this other way that
Well, those flyers were, I think, trying to project a exclusive, sexy, grown, dressed up, button down, and I was like, no, raw, dirty, bare. That was my aesthetic. Or like Indian kitsch, or
right.
Stuff that we see now on t-shirts. I was trying to do that shit way before, like, taking a fruity box and making it a Basement Bhangra flyer, or taking a map of India and closing in on it and it's the subway location. Or
had that Bhangra versus Bush flyer
that was, Chirag Gupta's vision. The party name was mine, the concept, but he took it to a next level. Yeah, and those things were very important to me. The flyer, I spent a lot of energy on the flyer.
Oh yeah, I remember looking at
so much. Like I would spend hours and hours sitting with the graphic designer there and trying
every month was a different flyer. Everyone
completely different
color schemes, different aesthetics. Sometimes things were repeating. Sometimes it was a solo image. Sometimes it was a collage. Sometimes it was a film still. Like really,
there were a lot of different things happening. And then we always, and this is some things I learned from SOBs, we always had a live VJ, but then the VJs got like more better. The VJs got better, and then we expanded to like a second screen. And now SOBs has refurbished, and now they have screens everywhere mounted. But that's like most places now. Access to visual and audio technology has gotten cheaper over time. I bought a projector from Best Buy for $80 and I use it at gigs now. It's fine for what
the projectors were $2,000-$3,000.
They were so expensive. They were so heavy. And the only way you could mix video is to get a big ass Panasonic, kind of like this device that was basically used for like editing, so that you could bring in different sources. And now you can do that without an external device on a computer, or you can do it with a simpler device. Things are definitely different and more accessible in a different way. But we invested and we did those things were very important to me. And what was on the screen was important to me. And making sure that we did not follow stereotypes and tropes and Hindu imagery and all of that. Now, unfortunately, all my work is for naught, because there are some other events that are larger, bigger, that don't give a shit about any of that. They're going right in for the elephant, right in center space.
No, I don't think you can say that. The work is certainly not for naught.
But it's not for naught, but everyone didn't get the memo.
Right. Well, there's a whole kind of thing that's happening now in the diaspora around, and what's happening back in India with the current administration.
That sentiment is pronounced now, but I was always conscious of it and very conscious of Hindu hegemony and very like careful and mindful not to do any of that in my events because it's low-hanging fruit and I don't agree or believe in any of that shit.
I wonder if you could define Bhangra, because the way you define it is not the way many people define it.
Bhangra is starting to become a dated term because now we're referring to Punjabi music at large. Bhangra is how I define it, is a folk music and dance originating from Punjab, a region divided by India and Pakistan. But if we go more technical, Bhangra is a particular rhythm in an array of folk rhythms, but has become ubiquitous to represent a range of folk music. So Bhangra is kind of like a beat or rhythm. And Bhangra is always sung in Punjabi language. And now Punjabi music in general has expanded, and musically it doesn't sound like what was thought of as Bhangra. It's the sponge of, all contemporary music. So if you take sometimes a popular track and you just play the instrumental version, you wouldn't necessarily know it's Punjabi. It could be anything.
What I just wanted to kind of think about for a moment in terms of the cultural impact of Basement Bhangra is that you were really working, I think, against the grain in terms of, some of the other parties, and really being and attempting to be as, pan-South Asian as opposed to like a kind of Indian space specifically, and always using words that are more inclusive, like South Asia and a region split by India and Pakistan, or using the name Punjabi specifically, which, is more regionally appropriate and not necessarily feeds into like a Hindu Indian nationalist moment.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that comes from my activism, and also understanding that, my parents were born in what's now Pakistan, and understanding Punjabi culture is not contained in either India or Pakistan. It's more expansive than that. And that's something I didn't really know until I got into this music. I think that I connect with the idea of South Asian or Desi, which is its own problem because it doesn't necessarily include all people from South Asia. And South Asia itself every way to name something has its challenges and problems. But because of our history and our connections with communities, I do feel like South Asian or having that mindset was very important. And I was very careful to do that. And always careful to say Punjab is Pakistan and India. One time I almost got attacked because I said that Sikhism is like co-opting Bhangra as a cultural, kind of claiming it in a way that erases other people. I said this at a talk at Columbia, and they were like, people getting really mad at what I said. I was like, it's true.
That's a minefield.
Yeah.
For sure. Can you share with us just the process of coming out with the Basement Bhangra album and the Basement Bhangra anthem?
Oh my God, the anthem that took that took a lifetime. The anthem was this idea of making a track that was lyrically about the experience of the party. At the time I started, I didn't really know. I knew what I want things to sound like, didn't know how to make them happen. So approached our, at that time, frequent musical guest to, come up with something. And so Bikram wrote the lyrics. And then he said, just get a hip hop producer and put some beats on it and blah, 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 blah. Like, okay, that sounds easy, a little too easy. And so recorded his vocals in England at some point, then took it around to some other friends, just wasn't working right. And then connected with this one guy, Sunil, and then really started working on it slowly, painfully, methodically, recorded a lot of different parts. It just grew and grew. Wanted to get a feature on it, like a guest vocal, and approached Papa Jube, who used to work with SOBs, and said, can we get somebody like Rupi on it? Rupi is a dancehall singer, and I don't know why I thought of him. Jube's like, what about Clef? What about Wyclef? I'm like, really? And I didn't know Wyclef at the time, or his desire to be down with as many people as possible. We were hoping for that. Didn't know when or where or whatever. And ended up, Wyclef had come by to the party and kind of familiar with it. He grew up in Jersey. He knew about Indian people as himself. And then one time I was invited to a studio just to see what he was doing. He was doing some track with this Indian producer from India, Hollywood meets Bollywood. We met, properly, not just at the club. And then at some point, Jube's like, Clef's ready. He's in the mood. Come right now. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, come right now. I was like, okay. And at that time, I had an office on 27th, and his studio was Platinum Studios on 42nd. It was the middle of the summer. I remember it was so hot. I texted Sunil, who was like the other producer. I was like, where you at? And he lived in Jersey City and he worked all over. He's like, I'm on the BQE. I'm like, get your ass here now. Bring the shit or whatever. And so we went in there in the studio, and Clef likes to clown at least one person in the room. He was clowning his studio assistant. I was explaining to him, I'm like, yo, and this is after a whole wave of time where we're hearing like Missy Elliott and even Little Kim's The Jump Off, and just we're hearing like Indian sounds and Timberland, some of Timberland songs, even The Bounce. Of course, Truth Hurts, Addicted. I told Clef, I go, listen, man, we're hearing all this Indian shit in hip hop, but Basement Bhangra was there first. We were there first. So do your research. I gave him a little thing and he ran with it. He recycled some of his go-tos, he made it work. And, I have a drop for life. DJ Rekha in the area. It was quick, he got the concept. He gave us some bars, some ad libs, and then we went to town with it. And the album itself came about because eventually, my career was just getting harder and harder to manage between Basement, bookings, etc. And I finally, through my networks, got a manager, Mark Davenport, who previous history was with house music with Twisted America, but he also worked at major label and with Miles Copeland, brother of Andy Copeland of The Police. They had put out a Bhangra album like in the 90s. There was a very few Bhangra albums that were released in the States, and one of them was What is Bhangra, which was a Natural Records, which is actually the same label Punjabi MC was on. The guy who owned Natural, he was very very shrewd, and he knew how to make relationships. So somehow he got his record released. And I know because I bought the singles when the singles were released as 12 inches because they were on IRS records. The whole joke around the Copeland families, the police, IRS, all their companies have like government names. Anyway, so Mark actually worked that record. And then years later, he was starting to build a management practice, like a management roster. And I was connected with him. He came to the party and he was like, he got it. He got it. And so he dialed in his connections and we got a deal at Koch Records, which is now E1 Music. Got the deal to basically do, my concept was a mix CD. So the idea was a mix CD, but I had to submit 4 original tracks. We would license the rest and it would be like a continuous mix. And that was the album that came out October 2007.
So Basement Bhangra birth year was 1997, so 10 years.
Yeah, 10 years.
I remember I bought...
You bought a stack for your family.
Yeah, for the Diwali. It was like the Diwali.
Everybody got it for, thank you.
Unlike your uncle who signed Bollywood albums.
No,
I actually had Rekha sign them. Where did Basement Bhangra travel as Basement Bhangra? I know, we end up in Central Park eventually, but where does Basement Bhangra go?
I mean, the thing is that, where do I end and Basement Bhangra begin or vice versa? I think when the album came out, we did, release parties, and the place that I did more of a Basement Bhangra type set was in DC at the Black Cat. So ended up at one point doing it, 4 times a year. But as I traveled as DJ Rekha and played a variety of things depending on the situation. I felt like Basement Bhangra had a lot of different pieces to it, and just me DJing wasn't enough to call it that. So the only time I officially went in on Basement Bhangra and agreed to do Basement Bhangra LA, it was a great party that people still talk about, but it was creatively, for me, like cringy, as the kids say today. It was cringe on every level because it was in a great venue, but they had DJs playing shit we would never play. They had a DJ before me playing stuff from my album before I got on. It was just not musically what I would have done. It wasn't like visually what I would have done. They just used the name and they abused it. And then by the next month, I thought we were building something to create something that was similar to New York, but they just didn't give a shit and they used it. And then the next month they booked somebody else and they were like, here, this is a new venue. It didn't last, but I really felt played. And so I don't use the name ever. And people say it all the time lightly, like, This one woman's like, why don't you just do it for one more night? I'm like, it's not a brunch, you know? I take it really seriously. And when we ended the party in 27 officially, the last show, we did leave SOBs for a while. I call that New Coke period. Came back to SOBs, and then did the last show there. And then on a Thursday, and then the Sunday did Central Park. Final mic drop. But as we go into the next chapters, now we are rethinking, and we did an encore presentation last year, which coincided with the 25th anniversary. And this year I'm doing something called, this year being 2023, something called Basement Bhangra Bacchanal. Kind of a nod to Basement Bhangra. I guess it's a Basement Bhangra adjacent. I don't know what it is, but the Bacchanal is a word that really means a lot, because this event is going to be outdoors, free, whatever, but it's also going to be in Queens and Flushing Meadow Park. And it's a summer stage in partnership with Summer Stage. So hopefully the scale is similar to Central Park Summer Stage in terms of
Viewers,
huh?
for our viewers, if they view the video before the summer, what's the date?
July 23rd, Sunday, doors 5 p.m., 5 to 9, Flushing Meadow, Corona Park. There will never be a monthly night called Basement Bhangra again, but there could be Basement Bhangra : other things.
Mm-hmm.
And there's definitely going to be t-shirts and merch, because I would love nothing better than to have regular passive income.
And you have great design, great art. It's like all
Logo.
stuff.
Once again, Chirag made our logo, so like it's all on him. He's moved on. He won't design stuff for me anymore. It's okay. We're not cool enough, but he left his mark.
Okay. What would be some dream things where you'd like Basement to go or be?
I'd love to have Electric Mayhem guest, have the Muppet Band, and we might have an in. Lily Singh is doing a show with them.
Wow.
So I don't know, maybe we can use the networks to get there. I don't really know. I think the idea behind Basement Bhangra Bacchanal in Flushing Meadow Park is to really acknowledge South Asian music for the people of Queens, which to me, growing up and being informed by it, not just the Desi party scene, but also the Indo-Caribbean music scene and Indo-Caribbean music clubs that I went to in college while and before I was DJing. Central Park and city parks and Summer Stage and New York in the summer at large has a lot of like free public programming. With all due respect to the bookers and the presenters, and I know them, they mean well, but they're overrun, and there's just not enough representation for the people that actually live here. As a curator for these spaces, I think it's really important that some of these resources go to showcase Indo-Caribbean music and the range of South Asian music and South Asian. I mean, give the people who've been going to Flushing Meadow Park, like I have with my family since I was 4, a place that's designed and a place of leisure for working class and immigrant families, like why not have them experience programming that speaks to them? Also, Brooklyn's played out, but everyone's coming for Queens, and before it gets parceled up and commodified, like let's put our stake in the ground and make sure that we have something that's for us before it becomes a outside tourist destination where, people come for concerts, and the programming could be McFest, with the same characters all over the country that reflect nothing of the community that it's taking place in. I'm already seeing it happen.
I was just thinking about that, just where, we end up. And I was thinking about what were some of the great meals after a long night. I mean, I remember kind of sometimes carrying out crates at like 4-ish. Is that around the time that I ended SOBs?
4, we go to New York goes till 4. Miami goes till 5.
City, by
Vegas
the
never
way.
closes. Yeah, I mean, afterwards, our meals were very often in Waverly.
Mm-hmm.
That was a given. Then there was a while where there was kind of a 24-hour bagel deli across the street. Me and Eddie would go there and talk shit and be like, we should have a radio show. We're just like a bunch of geezers, like talking about everything. And then sometimes we would go to Orlando.
Yep. R.I.P.
Orlando. Sometimes Veselka, no longer 24 hours. Not at Basement, but at some of the other parties, we'd go to Punjabi 5-Star, which was 24 hours, which is now basically a catering hall, not really a restaurant. I did parties in the Lower East Side, not there. We'd go to Punjabi Deli.
Barraquette? No.
Not,
Maybe before. Yeah.
no. Bearcat guy opened another spot down the street.
I was thinking about Florent too.
Oh, Florent.
Ugh, the crab cake,
Oh,
the salad. Had to say it. Had to say it.
how hard. That one's hard.
That's really hard.
Florent was post mutiny because meat packing.
Yep.
Hmm. And then Wednesdays I would go out a lot because Wednesdays, you know, it's not for the tourists. New York City's popping every night, so
Are there any cool or any parties you like to check out now?
I'm too old.
Where do we
Uh,
go? Where do those of us who
in
on the
Bushwick.
other side of 40 go now?
Everything's in Bushwick. I'm doing one of my other parties, Bollywood Disco at Sultan Room. I've done it twice now. I don't want to get into the rut of monthly parties, but it's a great home and I love that party and I don't mind doing it every once in a while. There's tons of parties, there's tons of places to go. There's tons of talent. There's a lot happening. There always will be. When a place gets too gentrified, people find another place.
Let's
Uh,
say you were nightlife mayor for a month. What would you do?
oh, thank you.
You would say no, thank you.
People are like, oh my God, Ariel's leaving. Do you want to be the nightlife commit? I'm like, nope. It doesn't sound like a terrible job. It just sounds like too much. I'm trying to work less.
Right, right. Like organizing one party once a month was so much work to.
Well, I think what Ariel did is great. She had to weather the storm of COVID and the pandemic, and I think she really made nightlife visible as an industry. I think she humanized the people that make it happen, which is really important. I think her work around drug safety and awareness in nightclubs has been very important. I do think that that's a very important role, and I'm glad it exists. I didn't make it on the council. They asked for me to submit my info, and I don't know, that was right when I was ending Basement, and it didn't look very nightlifey to them. I'm in the mode of like, let's do the parties during the day. Let's make it free. Let's make it all ages. Times have shifted on things. Make things accessible. That's really kind of where I'm going for. I do not want to do Baby Loves Disco. No shade to them, but that was a very particular experience where this party was constructed to target kids around disco, but it was like a Chuck E. Cheese in the club. Didn't work for me. I just think like, let's think about music and dancing outside of traditional nightlife constraints.
I think that speaks to a lot of these public programs you're thinking about. And also your interest in the city, your interest in neighborhoods, your interest in like intergenerational spaces, into more inclusive spaces for people of different abilities. Also for some people, the alcohol in a nightclub for some people in our community is a barrier too. Like there's a lot of things to kind of things we can think about how music need not necessarily be in a club 21 and over with an ID, like there could be other ways that we can.
Yeah. Yeah, there can be other ways. And I think our climate is such that summer comes and things explode in the summer. But also we're also a victim of climate change in our parties. Like summer stage schedule has changed because it's too hot.
How has it changed?
We used to do doors at 2, show at 3. We can't do that. It's too hot. We have to go later. So we're doing 5 o'clock doors. And their season is going later in the summer because it's warmer later.
What's something that you wish people had asked you about your parties or your music and your journey that people don't ask you?
I don't know if there's anything that I want them to ask me. I think that as an artist, it's that thing of like Basement Bhangra is a lot and it means a lot and it's important, but I do a lot of other shit. It's like being typecast as an actor. Any of the characters in Succession, are they ever going to be seen outside that role? Because they're so good at it. Sometimes people think I only play Bhangra 24/7. Little do they know that I listen to podcasts and public radio in my downtime. The success and having Basement Bhangra as a foundation to start an artistic career has provided me with a lot of opportunities. Like you just want to feel like you have people see all sides of you, or that you're working in a very popular medium with mass consumed music and trying to make it artful is not always noticed, seen, or appreciated. It seems very replicable, but I think that there's a lot of intention and thought around what I try to do.
I'm wondering if you just want to shout out some of the other projects and parties and collectives that you've Part of, other than Basement Bhangra, because I know this is the first.
The stepchildren that don't get enough shine. These are the other parties I've done. Some successful, some not. One was called Beat Bazaar. I've tried that party in so many formats. It's never taken off. My friend Bush was like, you keep going for it. I'm like, yeah. There was a party, a short-lived party called Lipstick Optional, which was focused on, it was for queer women. Mutiny was a party, a collective, started out as a fundraiser for a movie by the same name for Vivek Ball, but ended up growing its own DJ collective and its own vibe and everything that lasted for 7 years. That would be the second most successful. And Bollywood Disco, which is, God, started 21 years ago, which has been sporadic, but it's always had a very good, loyal following.
Yeah, solid.
It's always just been very contained and it's never really like blown up. But it's a lot of fun. Other things that I've been part of. I mean, I've been working with Chaya CDC in various capacities, volunteer, board, even consultant. I'm trying to think of what else.
Well, you've also been a professor.
Oh
and
yeah,
taught
teaching.
music. I mean, about
Oh
music.
yeah, I did a radio show for a long time, which started out on internet and then illegally became a podcast and eventually was abruptly shut, which I knew would happen. Yeah, I mean, I'm exploring other things and other opportunities. Not having a monthly party is hopefully giving me room to think about other options. But I've also been, last couple of years, went to grad school, got a degree after Basement. What else do you do? And then was involved a lot in elder care, which is something we don't talk about enough. Some of us are not parents, but we have parents and we take care of them in different ways. And I'm also in a committed relationship for 14 years, and that's a big part of my life. And just the range of gigs and projects I've done, I've been curating and presenting. I just love sharing something I'm excited about with other people.
You often lecture, you have done music supervision for film and TV projects.
Not exactly, done a little bit. No, yeah, okay. I have not had a title credit as a music supervisor, but I did do the intro music for a Hulu show that is in its second season called Taste the Nation with friends of mine. I finally met the sound designer engineer and I was like, you still using the same intro? And she's great. She's from Queens too. She goes, of course, it's perfect.
Love that. So yeah, so we can hear, I mean, the second season is live now on Hulu.
There's no show like it.
No. And
it's
great
not
episode with you from the first season in Queens.
Yeah, that's fine, but
And there's other
it's getting better and better because I saw the Puerto Rico episode and it really tackles all the complications of what is Puerto Rico, a territory that don't have representation in Congress, like, and all through food, and food as a way into a culture. And it's just very deeply researched. It really feels authentic, hosted by Padma Lakshmi. I think it's really something unique. We've been watching years and years of white men explore places for food, and this is a completely different take.
Rekha's also an amazing cook and, host of folks in their home.
Haven't done that in a while. Haven't been cooking in a while, but definitely had the greatest hits. Sonia's been cooking a lot more. I do look forward to getting back to hosting dinner parties.
Well, I think that that's one of the things that I feel that going into any of your parties does feel like, and you have the word basement there, is this idea of, really trying to create a sense of belonging, a sense of home, a sense of connection. Not that I'm like all tense and going to a club, but like I can actually exhale. I'm with my music, I'm kind of with some people, I'm with my people, whatever it is. And I think that that's something that you've brought to all of your projects, and you attempt to bring it to every single thing you're a part of. Sometimes the other structures are out of your control. You're creating the vibe, you're curating.
Wherever I'm going, I want to make sure there's music. Even if nobody asked me, I will force it upon them. So I think that's important. And I just feel like I'm hosting. I feel responsible. I think I learned that from my parents. I hate it if you're in line too long. I hate it if there's any part of your experience that isn't optimal. Like, what do you need? Can I get you something? That's kind of the mindset I have when I'm doing events.
I want to thank you, DJ Rekha, for
Very
joining
formal.
us on Quiet Before for this conversation that we're taping in May 2023. I remember the year this time.
Thank you for having me, and thank you, Nancy and crew, for doing this and capturing our histories.
And we'll see you on the dance floor. Is that where we'll see you?
Always see you dancing wherever the floor is. Yeah.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.